From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to take you inside the making of TT's 2022 Top 50 Global Freight Companies list, which we just published on November 7th, both in print and online at ttnews.com. This annual list ranks the world's largest freight transportation companies across all geographies and all modes of transportation. To produce this list, we worked closely with SJ Consulting to rank these companies based on annual revenue from freight operations. In addition to the main top 100 list, this publication also includes rankings of the largest container seaports and cargo airports in North America. If you haven't already done so, you can get exclusive access to the complete version of our Top 50 Global Freight Companies report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/tt subscribe. You can also text TT subscribe to 571-622-0001. And of course, don't forget to check out a fresh episode of RoadSigns every other Thursday. And now, to discuss how we assembled this year's Top 50 Global Freight Companies publication, I'm going to bring in two of my colleagues at TT, features editor Michael Fries and our new features coordinator, Mike Senatori. So we do have two mics on the podcast, but we'll make that work. We've been going with Michael and Mike system in the office to reduce confusion, and I'll do the same here. That aside, thank you both for your hard work on this project and for being a part of this conversation.
Glad to be here, Seth. This is Michael talking, by the way. But yes, this is going to be a very exciting time. So I'm happy to be a part of this.
Yeah, happy to join the podcast. This is Mike, by the way. Yeah, I'm excited to be on.
So just to start things off, I'd like to walk our listeners through the process of assembling this publication. As I mentioned earlier, we work closely with SJ Consulting on the main top 50 list. SJ compiles freight revenue data on companies all around the world, and then we add in supplemental information such as equipment and asset information, executive leadership, and company descriptions. So Mike, you took on the lion's share of the work this year. So I'd like you to describe the process of gathering and compiling the information that went into this list.
Sure. So, yeah, it was a big project. My first job was really to update the profiles that we have on companies that have appeared on previous year's lists. And, that includes checking for updates on their chief executives, their websites, and the stock listings. And for new companies on this year's list, which we had plenty of, I really had to build their listing from the ground up. And so that helped me, as someone who's sort of new to the trucking and transportation industries as a whole, it really helped me to learn more about third-party logistics providers and freight forwarders and the services that they really provide.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a great way to learn about the industry is to work on these publications. It's been, my experience as well at Transport Topics. I'm coming up on just about 12 years at this point, but it's amazing how much you learn working on these projects. And to your point, certainly is a big project. These 4 annual publications are a big part of what we do at TT. And you alluded to this earlier, Mike, but I also want to dive in a little bit deeper on one of the big changes to this year's Global 50. So this year we are now including third-party logistics companies and 3PL services. So these are companies, of course, that serve as intermediaries between shippers and carriers. They arrange and coordinate shipments, but don't typically move the freight themselves. So in the past, in this publication, we focus specifically on asset-based carriers, whether it's trucking or parcel, rail operators, ocean freight, and air cargo providers. But now that we're also considering some of these non-asset-based companies, we see that some of the big international freight forwarders and large freight brokers have qualified for this list, and those are, the bulk of the new companies that you referenced, Mike. Personally, I like this change because, increasingly it's becoming harder and harder to separate asset-based transportation and third-party logistics services. I mean, if you just look at the trucking industry, most of the large fleets, most of the large motor carriers are also freight brokers. They'd have a freight brokerage arm. And many of the large asset-based companies, global transportation providers, are also involved in warehousing, supply chain orchestration, and other logistics services. So it's harder and harder to truly delineate And for a list like this, that's supposed to be very comprehensive, and we're looking at all freight transportation around the world, it just makes sense to put it all together, I think, and include uh, asset based and non asset based freight transportation services together as we look at company revenue. Um, but that being said, I'd like to ask each of you to reflect on this year's final product. What are some of your top takeaways as you review this list? And I'll start with you, Michael.
You know, one of the things you just said, you touched upon, Seth, that you were saying with large trucking companies being throat breakers as well. Having that all services type of mantra, in the past, that was more of a marketing thing than an actual, a tangible asset or service to provide to their customers. And now in this day and age as well, when it comes to the supply chain bottlenecks that you're reading about, and even the striking port workers out in the West Coast, that's still going on. It's so important for companies to carve out that particular niche, and but at the same time, have these services that they offer, offering a wide range, and being more viable to potential customers. So I think us reflecting that particular change, and noticing that particular dynamic in this list, I think that's very helpful for this year versus years past.
Yeah, and it's in some ways easier, right? Because you don't have to delineate actual asset-based, freight services versus 3PL. But I want to ask you the same question, Mike. What stands out to you, the most as you reflect on your experiences working on this list for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, like you guys said, I really do like the change that we made with including the non-asset based companies. I think these 3PLs and these other non-asset based companies, they really play a vital role in the entire landscape of, freight transportation. So being able to include those on this year's edition of the list, I feel like it just gives it a more holistic view and as you said, Seth, a more comprehensive view of sort of the entire landscape of freight transportation.
Yeah, this is certainly our most comprehensive, the most zoomed out lens that we look at the industry. Very global, all modes of transportation. Of course, our core audience is trucking in North America, but for this publication in particular, we really like to look at the whole scope of freight transportation across the world. So we talked a little bit about how we put the publication together and what's new this year. But without any further delay, I think it's time to get into the rankings themselves. So, I'll start out at the top. No surprise that UPS and FedEx are the clear cut, numbers 1 and 2 on the list. Not only are UPS and FedEx the largest transportation companies in North America, that's also true on a global basis. Now, one prominent addition to this year is the U.S. Postal Service. In the past, we have not considered them for the list, but it's a kind of a unique case being a government operated entity. But there are other examples of that, both past and present on the Global 50 list. So it only made sense to include USPS. So they appear at number 4 on the list after being included for the first time, and it's not necessarily a reflection of their operations. It's a reflection of us including them on the list for the first time. But the Postal Service is number 4, and then the largest 3PL on the list is Switzerland-based ocean and air freight forwarder Kane and Nagel. They're at number 8. They're also factor highly on our list of North American operations in our annual top 100 logistics list we published earlier this year. And then we look at North American based 3PLs. Some of the largest freight brokers rank very highly. C.H. Robinson, largest broker in the U.S., North America, they debut at number 17 on this list. And Seattle-based freight forwarder Expeditors International checks in at number 23. So those are a few of the big changes and takeaways from the list itself. Michael, what companies or ranking changes stand out to you this year?
Well, you pretty much touched upon it. The USPS and Cain and Nagel. First, the USPS. It would be surprising, but at the same time, for years, the U.S. Postal Service has been working hand in hand with other delivery based services such as Amazon and even UPS to a certain extent. When it comes to weekend deliveries. So I mean, it's I wouldn't say a no brainer, but I mean it's a logical uh, destination as for being number four on that particular list. So good for the USA in that particular part. But no, the postal service is a very vital delivery link. We talk about the trucking industry all day every day here. That is our job, but the U.S. Postal Service really is a backbone, such as the trucking industry to this particular country. With Kane and Nagel, it's another thing in the kind of same sense that it's not so much a surprise, but it's a very large 3PL. I mean, we don't see too many trailers or tractors with the Kane and Nagel logo on it. But I mean, if you're a driver in somewhere in Southern Europe, I'm pretty sure you'll see that name quite a bit, as much as you see DHL and other worldwide carriers. So having those two on the list is really representative of what we were trying to achieve, as you were saying earlier, Seth, about having a comprehensive list. So I think those two entities really attest to that.
Yeah, and I'll also mention DHL at number three. So it's the top four companies are all in the parcel space, the largest transportation providers in the world, and with a postal service, three out of four are based in the U.S. Mike, I want to ask you the same question. What companies or ranking changes stand out most to you when you take a look at the list this year?
Michael, you touched on this before as well, but the company that really stood out to me was the Postal Service. I mean, the addition of USPS to the list shouldn't come as a surprise, but the fact that it made its debut all the way up at number four caught me a little bit off guard. It's really the only company in the top 10 that focuses the majority of its services in one country. Most of the other companies of that nature that we see on the list are state-run railway services, and the U.S. Postal Service outpaced all of them. And I found it kind of shocking, especially with the ongoing conversation that we've been seeing in America for quite a while now about how the Postal Service is on the decline and how things look a bit bleak for them. It was surprising to me to see how strong their numbers are compared to these other giants of freight transportation.
Yeah, for sure. The postal service is undergoing a transformation. Is in the middle of a transformation, and including the vehicles is going to be operating. So it's certainly a time of change.
Seth, I just wanted to add to that. It's just to what Mike was saying. It was just sort of, it is sort of surprising in the sense that you have a business model where you can send a letter from DC to Los Angeles for what, about 50 cents right now. So I mean, it's
Right. Yeah.
so there's not too many business.
That is not a market determined price.
Right. Yeah. So there's, I mean,
So it's a service, right?
it's been like that for
Uh,
quite a while. And as much as inflation is raging, that's I'm pretty sure most businesses wish they had that sort of price action.
From time to time, an issue commands so much of the industry's attention that it requires a deeper dive, a resource readers can turn to, a transport topic special report. We're turning our attention to another big issue, electrification and the key factors that will drive this industry trend. In every case, we're working to provide our readers with information, analysis, and clarity on key issues confronting fleets. One comprehensive resource packed with insights that can give you the edge. Transport Topics invites you to learn more about our special reports. To reserve your copy of the latest special report, visit ttn.ws/electrification.
and I do also want to mention that, of course, many trucking companies have large contracts with the postal service. Mail hauling contracts. So the postal service is not only a provider of transportation itself, it is also a shipper in a sense. It's a large customer for some trucking companies as well. So just as a reminder to our listeners, you can view the full top 50 list online at ttnews.com. And of course, you can get exclusive access to the complete version of our top 50 global freight companies report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/tt subscribe. So, as in years past, several of North America's largest trucking companies also stand among the largest freight transportation companies in the world. Just looking at the list, less than truckload carrier XPO Logistics ranks number 26 on the list. That company has morphed into a pure play LTL provider through the spinoff of its contract logistics business, which is now GXO Logistics, and also just recently its freight brokerage operations, which are now moving forward under the RXO name. So XPO, of course, assembled many operations and companies throughout the industry and built this very large operation in trucking and warehousing and logistics. But now the company has changed directions, and Brad Jacobs, who led the company on this path, has now separated them into more pure play opportunities moving forward with XPO, GXO, and RXO. So some other major trucking companies on the list this year on our top 50 include truck rail intermodal service provider JB Hunt at number 28, and Canada-based trucking and parcel conglomerate TFI International at number 42. A newcomer to the list I want to mention is number 45 Landstar System, which operates through a network of independent freight brokerage agents and independent owner-operators. So it's a bit unique compared to the other companies on this list. And the company had a lot of growth in 2021 with 58% revenue growth. So just a really banner year last year. And of course, all these companies are ranked on the basis of freight revenue from the most recent full year, which was 2021. Also mentioned, of course, truckload giants Knight Swift Transportation and Schneider are numbers 47 and 49 respectively on the list. And just rounding out the list at number 50 is LTL carrier Old Dominion Freight Line. I also mentioned that another LTL company, Yellow Corp, just missed the cut at number 51. Michael, I'll ask you also to reflect on the North American trucking companies that appear on the global top 50 list.
Sure. I hope that we don't get any angry phone calls from Darren Hawkins, Yellow Corp CEO. So he just made the list. He's the ATA vice chairman too. So I don't want any smoke. No, but seriously, the thing that stands out to me, you were just mentioning it earlier, Seth, was just XPO Logistics. With they've made a lot of noise this year with just with GXO Logistics and the RXO name as well. They're doing a lot of things in that particular space, and just we were talking about even earlier with just kind of freight these freight companies expanding their niche. So I mean, I think the freight companies in North America that are doing that, such as XPO Logistics, and even to a certain extent JB Hunt, those are the particular companies that are going to probably remain on this list that are doing that are not only the big players, such as Old Dominion Freight Lines. It's that the size of these companies, the leaders of these companies are taking that particular size and also learning how to not learning, but also diversifying their services and really letting it know to their consumers and the potential customers what they are capable of. So, I mean, I think the companies that are doing that and are continuing to do that are going to remain on this list and be very viable in the future.
Yeah, certainly an interesting mix of companies that have expanded their service offerings and have morphed over the years. JB Hunt is one that has reinvented itself over the years from a more of a traditional trucking company to a really now an intermodal service provider, and really becoming more of a broader service provider and through its JB Hunt 360 platform. And then you have sort of the opposite with XPO. It's a company that through acquisition grew and really expanded into a variety of services, both trucking and logistics. and now has moved in the opposite direction with more of these pure play approaches. XPO is going to be a LTL provider, GXO contract logistics, and RXO freight brokerage. Really technology enabled freight brokerage. So really, moving more toward specialization, which is kind of a counter point to maybe the broader trend in the industry. But it certainly is interesting to watch that develop. Mike, I want to turn it over to you as well, just to get your thoughts and reflections on the trucking companies that appear on our top 50 list.
It was good to see that even with our expanded list this year covering 3PLs, and covering other non-asset based companies, North American trucking really stood its ground and maintained its presence across the list. And something that really stood out to me was that even though certain companies within the sector that they might have moved backwards in the rankings from last year's list, we still saw a increase in their freight revenue. And this is the case with companies across different industries on the list, but it really stood out to me with the North American trucking, specifically companies like XPO, like you said, they moved back 2 spots compared to last year's ranking, but they grew their freight business by $4.7 billion. JB Hunt, as you said, moved back 3 spots, but they increased their revenue $4 billion. And this is the case for all the trucking companies that you mentioned earlier. Even Knight Swift, which took sort of the biggest step backwards in their ranking, falling 12 spots, they still saw an increase of over $1.8 billion in their freight revenue from 2020 to 2021. So I think it reflects very well on North American trucking as a whole, and sort of as you said, how these companies are expanding their services and evolving with the time.
Yeah, I mean, trucking, even today remains a very fragmented industry where so much of the work is done by small and medium-sized companies. But that being said, the very largest trucking companies in North America still rank highly, even on a global scale. And to your point, Mike, on the ranking changes, that is more of a function of the change to our criteria for the list, rather than a change of the true makeup and size of these companies, because we are now including 3PLs on the list that changed the makeup of the list. But a lot of the trucking companies that dropped in rankings actually increased in size, increased in revenue, certainly during 2021. So it's good to make that point, and also to make that clear for those who are wondering, oh, hey, why did this company drop? It's also largely because we're now counting some other companies that we did not factor in before. Next up, I do want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about some of the content in the publication beyond the top 50 list. So I'll start with our North American seaports data. And we made a pretty big change this year. In years past, we used to publish a pretty extensive directory of ports that included mostly tonnage information. But honestly, we kind of questioned the value of that, kind of a sea of data that we released without a whole ton of context. So this year, we've replaced that with a much more focused look at the largest container ports in North America. And we made that change because we believe that's the most valuable information for our audience. Again, leaders and decision makers at trucking and logistics companies. Mike, you spearheaded that project, so just tell us a bit about your findings as you put together that list of the largest container ports in North America.
I think that honing in and changing what was the port directory to really a ranking system, I think that was the right move. Conceptually, it matches with the top 50 list and the airports ranking, so there's a bit more consistency between those three elements of the publication. And it also focuses in on what the important information is, and it makes it easier for readers to take in and analyze. Putting the port ranking together itself was a bit of a tedious project. We're fortunate enough that the top 50 list and the airport ranking, they're built already before we really get our hands on them. We get those from SJ Consulting and from the FAA, respectively. But the port ranking was truly built from the ground up. And in terms of taking an overall look at the seaport data, just like we saw with the global freight companies, seaport container volumes were up overall. It was a huge rebound in 2021 as demand surged and supply chain issues eased as much as they could. And California really remains the hotspot in North America, with the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach holding the top two spots on the list.
Yeah, for sure. The port complex in Southern California is just such a massive operation, and it's one of those things where you don't really even fully understand it until you're out there for yourself. And I remember the first time I did a tour, via waterway, and I couldn't believe, like, wow, this just keeps going on and going on. And the ports of LA and Long Beach, of course, are nestled together, so it's not even super clear where one begins and the other ends, at least from the viewpoint of the water. But just so much freight passes through, so many imports and exports passing through those ports. Um, and yeah, I do think that that's a really good resource for the industry now, and I'm glad we made the change.
Transport topics in one word: authoritative.
Knowledge. Outstanding.
Reliable.
We asked Transport Topics readers to describe us in one word.
Informative.
Informative.
Integrity.
The Bible. Authoritative.
The authority. Transportation information, that's two, but I gotta have it both.
Physically large. Oh, that's two words.
Visit influence.ttnews.com/say hello to find out what they're talking about.
Another topic I want to bring up is, not just the data, but also the sort of the industry trends that we look into. So much like our other annual publications, the Top 50 Global Freight Companies publication is not just a list; it's also a big picture look at the state of the industry. And in this case, the state of international freight. And this year's cover story for the publication examined the uncertain outlook for international shippers and freight transportation providers in the year ahead. So the past 2 years, of course, have been a time of severe supply chain disruptions, port congestion, labor shortages, just really across the board. And some of those supply chain issues and concerns have now abated, but now shippers, carriers, and 3PLs are facing economic uncertainty on the horizon. Many analysts are predicting at least a mild recession this coming year. So that's now lingering for managers and decision makers in business to navigate in the coming months and year and beyond. So, Michael and Mike, I'd like to ask each of you to share your thoughts on the road ahead for the world's largest freight transportation companies. Michael, I'll start with you.
One of the things, Seth, that I've seen when it comes to just the international freight situation is those problems that you just mentioned about supply chain bottlenecks, that has subsided on the West Coast, but the East Coast is still getting just a little bit of those particular problems. So I mean, it seems that the issue has shifted, and that's primarily from the shippers who had anticipated a backlog and just working forward and then going to other ports, in lieu of the bottlenecks that they're now having. So that problem has kind of switched, and as you also said, with the 10,000-foot view of this, as our annual magazine shows what's going on with the international trade situation, is that now you can kind of see it with the boots on the ground when you go to your retail stores. The shelves are packed, but they are packed from orders that were placed back in the spring or summer. So now it's kind of those problems that we were having in that spring and summer are now moved to the holiday season, and the holiday season is known to have a big uptick for consumer business, but that is a question mark when you have a recession, or the fears of a recession looming out, and the consumer spending is not as strong, but I mean it's still resilient, but there's still a lot of question marks involved. So having an eye toward international trade people an idea of what this country is headed toward when it comes to business and when it comes to consumer spending. So just kind of having all of those dynamics play out, you have that particular situation. But another thing I wanted to point out, Seth, too, just in the copy that's in the content that's in this new issue, is that with the manufacturers are thinking about near sourcing or even bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. I mean, we've seen that trend slowly rise in the last few months or a year or so. But that's a particular trend that I thought that was pretty eye opening. Since we've often, especially in our political space, talk about bringing manufacturing jobs back here to the United States and not having them outsource, or even with the business perspective of businesses having that outsource. Coming to a country that's closer to the United States. So those are particular trends that I think that are very encouraging. So when it comes to the big landscape of things.
Yeah, certainly a time for logistics planners to reevaluate supply chains in light of all the disruptions we've seen over the past 2 years. A greater focus not just on the efficiency and speed of supply chains, but also the resiliency. Hey, when there is a supply chain disruption, are you prepared? How can you rebound, or how long will it take to get a critical component that a manufacturer needs to produce products? Of course, we saw that with semiconductor chips and the automotive and also the truck manufacturing space, just as an example, but many more examples. So, much more of a sort of a reevaluation of supply chains, and maybe it makes sense to reshore or nearshore some of this manufacturing and some of the supply base. That's of course a conversation that happens over a lot of time. This is not something that can be done overnight for the most part. It's a multi-year sort of process of shifting your supply chains and your sourcing and your where you decide to locate manufacturing, for example. That's something that's a big ship to turn around, and that just takes time. But that is increasingly part of the conversation. And I think that there's a lot of global shippers and transportation companies and logistics providers that have been taking a closer look at ways to improve the resiliency of supply chains, and maybe not just continuing with the just-in-time kind of paradigm of how can we operate a lean and efficient supply chain. We also need to be ready to handle the bumps in the road. Mike, I also want to turn over to you, to ask your thoughts on what you see on the horizon for international shippers and transportation providers in the year ahead.
Well, the supply chain issues really can't be understated. Even with moderate improvements, as Michael said, we see a bit of relief on the West Coast, but the problems are still prevalent on the East Coast. These disruptions are still happening, and they're still holding up business for shipping companies. The looming recession that has been talked about for a little bit now would have a serious negative impact on consumer spending, and that could lead to sort of a downturn for freight overall. Uh, what I'm watching most closely myself is the ongoing labor disputes between rail companies and their employee unions. Uh, we're not really out of the woods yet in terms of avoiding a rail strike, and that strike could have a disastrous ripple effect for the entire US economy, and particularly supply chains would be really, really stressed by that. But if a strike can be avoided, then freight companies can let out a big sigh of relief.
Yeah, for sure. This has been a very important topic to watch over the summer, and on the rail front, it looked like we were on a very good trajectory with the tentative agreement. But there is still last I checked, two unions that did not vote to approve that agreement. So still some question marks about labor negotiations on the rail side, and the same is true with the ports. The ports situation very much remains as well, but that is an issue that will need to be resolved to continue to move our supply chains and global trade back toward normalcy, even as we start to enter a uncertain time for the economy. But hey, I'm looking at the clock, and I think we've probably exhausted most of the key topics of that are connected to our top 50 global freight companies list. I appreciate both of you gentlemen for all the hard work you put into the project, and also thank you for your help taking our listeners inside the making of this year's top 50 list. As I mentioned before, this is one of our big projects of the year, so it always feels great to see it all come together. Thank you both for joining the podcast.
Not a problem.
Thanks for having me.
So we hope you've enjoyed this in-depth look at Transport Topics 2022 Top 50 Global Freight Companies list. As a reminder, you can view the complete Top 50 list and related information online at ttnews.com. And of course, if you're a Transport Topics subscriber, you already have a hard copy packaged with the November 7th issue of TT. If you've enjoyed this episode of RoadSigns, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the RoadSigns team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And also, let us know how we did by texting TT Survey to 571-622-0001. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode of RoadSigns. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.